You hear it before you see it. A low sound at the edge of the firelight. Not a growl, not a warning, just breath. You don't move. You wait, and slowly, just past the circle of orange light, a pair of eyes catches the glow and holds it. For a long moment, nothing happens. And then, quietly, the eyes look away. For most of human history, that moment would have ended very differently. Wolves and humans were competitors. They hunted the same prey, moved through the same territories, and understood each other as threats. A wolf near your camp at night was not a neighbor. It was a problem. And yet somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, depending on which evidence you weight most heavily, something changed. Not suddenly, not with a single act of heroism or intention, but slowly, across dozens of generations and thousands of silent nights, the wolf stopped being a danger and started becoming something else entirely. This is the origin of the most important interspecies relationship in human history. And almost everything you think you know about how it began is probably wrong. Let's start with the bones. The oldest confirmed dog remains come from a burial site in Bonn Oberkassel, Germany, dating to roughly 14,200 years ago. Inside the grave, archaeologists found 2 humans and the remains of a dog. Not a wolf in the loose sense, a domesticated dog. And the detail that makes this find remarkable is that the animal had clearly survived a serious illness as a puppy. Distemper, most likely. The kind of disease that kills young animals fast unless someone intervenes. Someone had kept this dog alive when it could not survive on its own. Fed it, nursed it, spent resources on an animal that, at that stage, could give almost nothing back. By the time that dog was buried, it had already been a companion, something worth grieving. But here's the thing nobody tells you. By the time of that burial, domestication had already been underway for thousands of years. The Bonn Oberkassel dog is not the beginning. It is a moment we happen to find. The actual beginning is older, messier, and stranger than a single grave can tell you. The genetics are where the story gets genuinely unsettling. In 2021, a study published in Nature, led by geneticist Anders Bergstrom and a team from the Francis Crick Institute, analyzed ancient dog DNA from across Eurasia spanning thousands of years. What they found was striking. All domestic dogs alive today descend from a single wolf population that was domesticated during the last ice age, not multiple independent events in separate places. One source population, one origin. Where exactly is still debated. Central Asia and Western Eurasia are the strongest candidates. But the when is equally significant. The Ice Age, a period of extreme resource scarcity, climatic instability, and survival pressure on every large mammal on Earth, including both wolves and humans. This did not happen because times were easy. It happened because times were desperate. Now here's a piece of this story that almost nobody talks about. You likely imagine early humans finding a wolf pup, raising it, and intentionally training it. A plan? A decision. That framing is almost certainly wrong. The most compelling theory, developed in large part by evolutionary biologist Raymond Coppinger and refined across decades of comparative animal behavior research, is that domestication was not something humans did to wolves. It was something wolves began doing to themselves. Here is how it likely unfolded. Wolves near human encampments had access to something extremely useful. Scraps, discarded bones, leftover meat. The edge of a human settlement after a successful hunt was a buffet for any animal bold enough to approach it. Wolves that could tolerate the presence of humans, not aggressive enough to provoke retaliation, not so skittish that they fled, ate better than their competitors, survived more winters, had more offspring. Generation by generation, the wolves that could handle proximity to humans passed that trait forward. The fearful ones stayed in the forest. The aggressive ones were driven off or killed. What remained, slowly and without any human intent, was a wolf that was measurably less afraid of people than its ancestors. Coppinger called this self-domestication. Humans weren't breeders. They were, in a sense, janitors. The wolves were selecting themselves against the backdrop of human waste. You might be thinking, fine, but how does a wolf that's merely less frightened eventually become an animal that sleeps inside your tent? That's a fair question. The answer lives in one of the most extraordinary accidental experiments ever conducted. In the 1950s, Soviet geneticist Dmitri Belyaev began breeding silver foxes at a research institute in Novosibirsk, Siberia. He selected for exactly one trait, which foxes showed the least fear response toward humans. He bred only those. He repeated the process every generation. Within 40 generations, an eye blink in evolutionary time, the foxes had changed. Not just in temperament, in body, their ears grew floppy, their tails curled, their coats developed patches and spots. They began seeking out human attention, whining when handlers left the room, displaying behavior that looked in every meaningful way like a domestic dog. What Belyaev observed was a phenomenon called neoteny, the retention of juvenile traits into adulthood. When you select for reduced fear, you accidentally pull along a whole package of linked physical and behavioral characteristics. The animal stays permanently puppy-like, curious, dependent, expressive, oriented toward the social world around it rather than away from it. What Belyaev reproduced in 40 generations of foxes had already happened over thousands of generations to the ancestral dog. The wolf did not merely become less dangerous, it became structurally different in skull shape, in hormonal profile, in the way it read faces. And faces are exactly where things get interesting. Let's talk about what the evidence actually tells us about what happened next. Because once that early tolerance existed, once wolves had begun self-selecting for proximity, the benefits to both sides started compounding quickly. The most immediate advantage humans gained was not a hunting partner or a herding assistant. It was something more primitive, an early warning system, a proto-dog that reacted to sounds and smells at the edge of camp before any human ear could catch them, was functionally a perimeter alarm. It cost the humans scraps. It cost the animal nothing it wasn't already getting. Research on modern hunter-gatherer communities supports this. Studies of the Ache in Paraguay, the Andaman Islanders, and other foraging groups have found that dogs in these societies are not primarily task animals. They sleep near camp. They react to disturbance at night. Their most consistent role is alerting humans to the presence of strangers or predators before those threats become visible. Ancient humans didn't decide to adopt wolves because they needed guard dogs. They kept proto-dogs around because the proto-dogs made the night feel safer. And the night, for your ancestors camped in the Pleistocene with cave lions and hyenas at the edge of the dark, was always the threat. Over time, the usefulness expanded. Dogs began to assist on hunts, not because they were trained to do so deliberately, but because their interests overlapped with the hunters. A proto-dog that tracked the same prey as the human group and stayed close enough to share in the kill had every reason to stay near. Hunters who brought a dog had an advantage over hunters who didn't. That feedback loop tightened the bond generation by generation. By 14,200 years ago, when the Bonn Oberkassel burial was made, the relationship had already crossed into something the bones alone cannot fully measure. Humans were burying their dogs, nursing sick puppies back to health, grieving. Something that would later become what you recognize as love for an animal had already begun to take shape in Paleolithic Europe. Here's where it gets interesting, because this is not just a story about dogs. The domestication of the wolf is the first confirmed case of humans forming a long-term, stable, mutualistic relationship with another species. And it may have been the cognitive and cultural template for everything that came after. The same pattern of loose tolerance shifting toward active selection and mutual dependency repeated itself later with goats, cattle, horses, pigs, and eventually the entire agricultural system. Gregor Larson, a geneticist at Oxford whose work on ancient animal DNA has transformed how we understand domestication across species, has argued that the dog relationship was genuinely unique in what it demonstrated. It showed functionally that interspecies cooperation was possible, that the world did not have to be organized purely around predator-prey dynamics, that two species could negotiate something more durable. That knowledge, lived and instinctual rather than abstract, may have changed how your ancestors understood the living world around them. Does that seem like too sweeping a claim? Consider the alternative. Without the dog, every subsequent domestication event had to be invented from nothing. With the dog already embedded in human life for thousands of years, the concept of taming, of reshaping another species' relationship with humans through proximity and selection, was already part of the cultural inheritance. But here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. What did the wolf lose? A gray wolf in full health is one of the most capable predators this planet has produced, coordinated in ways that rival military strategy, capable of sustained pursuit across hundreds of kilometers, physiologically adapted to survive conditions that kill most other large mammals. The domestic dog has lost most of this. It is softer, physically more juvenile. Dependent on humans in ways its ancestor never was, its skull is shorter, its brain is slightly smaller, its stress response is permanently altered. And yet there are approximately 1 billion domestic dogs on Earth. There are perhaps 300,000 wolves. The wolf gave up wildness and inherited the world. Whether that was a good trade depends entirely on what you think survival is for. You feel the result every time a dog tracks your movements across a room without being asked. Every time an animal that is not human reads your face and adjusts its behavior in response. Every time something looks at you with an expression you cannot help but interpret as loyalty. That is not training. It is not performance. It is 40,000 years of slow and incremental evolution that was shaped at its deepest level by the pressure of cold nights and shared fires and the discovery that two very different kinds of mind could understand each other across a gap that should have been impossible to cross. You didn't domesticate the wolf. The wolf came in from the dark, pressed close to your fire, and decided you were worth staying near. And you have been sharing warmth ever since.